So Switch 2 news is flying around all over the place, and why wouldn't it be? We're 5 days away from the launch of a new generation with Nintendo. But of course, as people are interested in the games and the hardware itself, there's also many people interested in the other side of things when it comes to hacking, homebrew, unsigned code, be able to open up the system beyond what Nintendo is sort of limiting it to with things like certain clock speeds and other aspects to it. Well, there is one post that is currently making the rounds that I gotta say it's ridiculous when you really go through it, but I am seeing it pop up as people genuinely concerned or even curious if this is really a thing and if the Switch 2 is more delicate than we thought. Well, I did show this to a few people, and it resulted in what can only be described as laughter. So we'll go over that here today. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. Now, this is the post in question. Again, I'm seeing this pop up a lot on places like X right now, Reddit, some other forums. I had people send it to me, and it basically describes the idea of some hackers getting their hands on the Switch 2 early. Now, I will say, it's pretty clear that the Switch 2 is getting out in the wild early. People are posting unboxings. They're posting videos of the system turning on. I've had multiple accounts send me just pictures of them getting the Switch 2 early. Like, it's pretty clear that in some regions it's a bit more lax in terms of selling the system to people. In my area, I know Walmart, Best Buy, Target, they should already have their allotments in the back, like in the warehouses or just even back behind the counter at this point, locked away. But they're not going to be able to sell them. They're register locked. So even if the person wanted to, they can't get it beyond the point of sale at this time. At least not until midnight, of course, June 5th. Well, in this case, they are saying some hacker got their hands on Switch 2. Now, I saw the color scheme, the font, immediately knew this was GBA Temp. Okay, and GBA Temp is a very good source of information around typically just breakthroughs in terms of hardware and software exploits or mods. So I was relieved, I will say, that in the follow-up after this post was made, that many people were kind of questioning this whole thing. Is like, this doesn't sound right at all. So at least there's that. Now let's go through the 2 points that they have here. Starting at the top. The MIG switch was tested, and it immediately locks out the Switch 2, turning it into a brick and ends up boot looping. Now, to my understanding, and this has been run as news headlines for a few days now, the Switch 2 needs a day one update for some core functionality, and some of that has to do with backwards compatibility with the Switch 1. The MIG switch is indeed trying to simulate a Switch 1 cartridge. So I would assume if you put the MIG switch into a Switch 2 right now, it wouldn't really be able to figure out what it is. And I think at that point, it would just say, go ahead and eject or try to reinsert it. I'm sure many of you have had this happen with your current Switch at some point in time, where the teeth on the back are like they're dirty or something, and you pop it in and the Switch can't read it, and it tells you to reinsert. That is what I figure would happen with MIG switch, because it's already done that before with my current, like the Switch 1 now. So it wouldn't shock me if that were the case. However, to believe that the Switch 2 would be turned, as they say, into a brick and boot loop after the MIG switch itself was just dropped in, it just sounds absurd, because then apparently all I need is a MIG switch cartridge to run around at a friend's house or a convention or something, find every Switch 2 and just go on a boot looping brick spree. So all it does is take a few seconds to drop that thing in there and it's over. So, okay, we'll start with that. One of the easiest ways, apparently, to brick a new system is with a MIG switch. All right. Now, they go on to say that testers that prod the flash storage of the ROM chip, it immediately locks out the Switch 2, turning it into a brick. Switch 2 detects has some weird protection that it can detect voltage changes that tools cause when scanning the chips, even when it is minor. I mean, this is on a forum, so it's going to be very informal in terms of typing or grammar or anything, but this does kind of seem like maybe a translation app or just a lot of typos in there. However, the idea that the Switch 2 would be turned into a brick because of minor voltage changes that it's able to detect and I assume understand, again, sounds, just absurd that that's the case. So if you remember, like we've had situations with the Switch actually bricking from voltage changes or some issues when it comes to charging, or with the dock. Remember that whole thing early on where the Switch 1 could potentially brick if you're using a third-party unlicensed dock. And that was very early on, all right? And it wasn't every time. There are people who had these docks and never really ran into issues, and it was enough of a chance for people to just avoid the dock completely. But people didn't really have issues plugging it in places where maybe you have a charger that's not necessarily licensed or up to standard. The Switch 1 can kind of figure it out and then charge however much the handshake says it can, right, when you plug it in. So in this instance, though, they're mentioning, I assume, external tools that are used to kind of probe around. And what they're, I guess, trying to do is figure out a vulnerability in the security to find an entry point, and then, of course, run unsigned code and try to unlock or hack the device. Now, what this is basically, what the picture this is painting is one of a very, very delicate system. I mean, at this point, the way that it's being described here, Nintendo would have a ton of systems that would get bricked. Not even necessarily for people trying to hack the system, just from everyday use or accidents or something happening, maybe with it, again, not lining up with your charger that day or just general hiccups. Usually the systems are designed to have many fail safes or have things that it can go to if it detects something like this. And most of the time, that's not to go to a boot loop and to be bricked. Now, that's not to say that these systems won't have issues when it gets out into the wild and you have a small percentage that do run into problems and then have to be taken care of under warranty. However, there's many things about this post that don't sound right at all. I just really like the implication here that Nintendo lent out Switch 2 systems to people who were trying to hack the system. Like, Nintendo wouldn't have had at least some knowledge of these people. And they even say here, in the end, it had to return to Nintendo and they longer allowed to be testers and had to pay for the console. Otherwise, it will go to small claims court, as it has some form of internal reporting that unauthorized use was made. Small claims court, testers with bricked Switch 2 systems. What are we doing here? People have been trying to figure out if this is a system that is going to run into the same situation as the current Switch, where early on it was hacked and it was off to the races from there. I don't necessarily believe so with the Switch 2, mostly because it's not an off-the-shelf X1 like what we had with the Switch 1. So, with the Switch 1, early on, about 20 million units were very easy to hack because it was an X1. And people were able to figure out very quickly that if you can get it into kind of this recovery mode by bridging 2 points to basically act as the button that they were missing on startup, you could push it into that mode and then have unsigned code and payload get pushed to the system. And again, they were off to the races. However, Nintendo was able to eventually fix that with their 16 nanometer revision, Mariko, that chip. And after that, you had to go directly to the chip. Most people aren't going to be doing that at all. It's so easy to destroy the system doing that because it's very, very small and it's very, very fine soldering to these specific points. All right. So that's one of the reasons that you haven't seen it as widespread after that happened. And it's kind of limited to some of the earlier Switch systems when it comes to a lot of that stuff. Still though, with this T239 that Nintendo is introducing here with the Switch 2 and it being very customized, I assume there will be some security measures in place that are beefed up even from that. So Nintendo at that time had these eFuses in the system, like little microscopic fuses, you could say. And the point of it was that when you would upgrade like your firmware, those would blow and you couldn't then go backwards and downgrade. It was legitimately a way for them to stop you from downgrading to a firmware that was more exploitable, right? And they pushed updates constantly. For the firmware, and a lot of them were minor things or like system stability, and yeah, you had like security updates. The point is, I don't think you have a system that is this easy to brick, and after going through again the person's background here on GBA Temp, it's no wonder that a lot of the people were like, yeah, it sounds made up, because yeah, it most likely is. I would bet that it's a lot of fiction that's kind of written there. And I think that's why many people there have kind of written it off. However, it seems like there's a bit of a lagging effect with it then getting to the internet and then being passed around as, wow, the system just basically destroys itself if you put a MIG switch in or if you try to probe around and look for an entry point with minor changes in voltage. Now, you can short the system out. I can't say that that's not a possibility, and most likely that will happen. I don't know if it's going to be as easy again as is being described here. So for now, I would kind of write this off as someone posting up, go figure, anonymously online on a forum, something that is completely made up. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below as we head towards that Switch 2 launch. Do you think we will get news of the Switch 2 being hacked or in some way opened up to homebrew like in the first year, or will this be something that takes a while if it ever happens? And from the emulator side of things, do you think we'll ever see that happen? Because something tells me it's going to be a bit more difficult to emulate the Switch 2 compared to what we have right now with the current Switch. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.